knee pain and fixing pain in general, but I find the knees are quite precarious because when we start to look at triage and troubleshooting joints and pain and joints in any capacity, we're always having this yin and yang of structure and function. It's like, okay, if we're going to triage and troubleshoot, what are the structures that could be potentially injured, right? Or what could be triggering us to have pain? And those are two different things. Pain and injury are different. And when we look at the knee and you think, okay, how much of this is structure? How much of it is function, meaning like muscles and tendons? And how could we potentially use what we know about the function to maybe offset potential damage in the structure, right? And you start to put a list of like, okay, what's structure and what's function? And you start to realize like, there's like a lot of shit that can go wrong in the knee and like not a ton of ways at the knee directly that could fix it. And you're like, oh, fuck, this could be kind of like bad, right? So if the early stages, your first 24 hours, you get knee pain, you're lifting, you're walking down the fucking sidewalk in St. Louis, you're getting out of your mattress on the floor, and your initial thought is like, okay, one, structure function. What could it be? Two, what does my next 24 hours look like? Those two decisions, the accuracy of those two decisions, how close to you can get to what's actually happening, will vastly accelerate their success. Because I want to leave something open, right? It could be that first 24 hours you're going in to get surgery. That could be an option. And I think a lot of people in the training and rehab space can be very anti-surgery. It's like, no, if I know, and I'm really good now at like, this is clinical, this is subclinical. If I had like a quad tendon rupture, the best thing I can do is get my ass in the fucking surgery table, like in the first 24 hours. So that's like a starting point for me. It's like, all right, structure function. And I want to unpack that a little bit as we move forward. Like, what are the structures of the knee? What do we commonly associate some structural damage with when it comes to perception of pain? And then based off of that, going, well, what does my next 24 hours look like? How could I begin to manage this conservatively versus should I go get this checked out more clinically?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And that's understanding those two things that shows the course or the trajectory of treatment, right? Is structural things. There's only a few structures in the knee that we're really looking at in terms of, all right, is surgery on the table here? Or ACL, MCL, PCL, meniscus. You could be looking at like, I don't know, you could be looking at like patellar fractures or like condylar fractures, things like that. But they're a little bit more rare. And usually what you're trying to look at is what's the mechanism here, right? Like getting out of bed and a grenade goes off in your knee. You're probably not looking at any type of fracture there, right? It's going to be a pretty high impact injury, where maybe the first thing that's indicated is imaging, right? If it's to the degree that, well, maybe not even if it's to the degree, but if the mechanism is more of an acute injury, if there was an incident of injury, and if it was something impact, like you're playing a sport, you're playing football, you have a lateral impact, something of the sort, or it's something more traumatic in nature, then imaging might be the first thing, right? If it's something that's a little bit more transient or something that's a little bit more chronic, then a lot of times I'm not necessarily going to jump to say imaging, but we can start to look for symptoms of, okay, is this something that looks to be more muscular or functional in nature? Or is this something that looks to be a little bit more structural in nature? And meniscus is like one of those kind of in-between ones where it can kind of look like both, but there are some kind of telltale signs if you have a meniscus injury. Like the ones that I look out for and I'll talk to people about is like locking or giving out of the knee. That's a big one. Or like joint line pain in deep knee flexion. That's another one that will point in my mind towards meniscus injury. Outside of that, it's like stability, functionality. Like there's things like, I remember, dude, it's probably been, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, we were sitting on the turf at Pure Muscle and Fitness. You're like, yo, will you check out my knee? And I just like do an anterior draw test on your left knee. And it just keeps going. Like there's no ligament here to stop anterior translation of this tibia. So I was like, all right, that's probably more of a structural injury. But once you start to be able to kind of batch things into these buckets, and I don't, everyone listening, I don't expect you guys to do this, especially if you're trainers, like that may not be your job, but someone comes in with a diagnosis or someone comes in after an injury, you can start to look towards, all right, what are the things that they're able to do? What are the things they're unable to do? And the better understanding you have of that injury, is it more structural? Is it more functional? Then that gives you a better idea towards what kind of outcome you're going to get and what type of treatment plan you're going to have with that person. Like if it is structural, like you clearly have no ACL in your left knee, like, all right, well, what's the function of the ACL? The ACL is there to prevent anterior translation of the tibia in knee flexion. Cool, sick. What else functions in that same way? The hamstrings, right? They're going to prevent anterior translation of that tibia as the knee flexes. So it's like there are answers that we can look towards to use the function to bolster structural deficits or vice versa, right? It's not often we want to use the structure to bolster functional deficits, but if we do have a functional deficit, then understanding, okay, what type of injury does this look like? Is this like a muscle strain, a muscle tear? Is this inflammatory? Is it something that's more chronic? Is it something that's more acute? And then you can start to pool things from that information to get you to understand what is the way out of this? So I think it might be cool to run these in parallel because you have a very structural issue with your knee. And we could talk about like how you go about training and rehabbing that. I had something that was more on the function side. Like I've had knee pain on and off my entire weightlifting career, but beginning of 23, so about a year and a half ago now, I had one specific clean where I had an injury. I didn't get it checked out, but from my assessment, I believe it was a partial tear of my right quad tendon, which is yes, kind of in between that function and structure, but it's more on the functional side, right? The tendon's just a non-contractile part of a muscle. So the way that I went about assessing that and rehabbing that is probably a bit different than the way you went about assessing and rehabbing your knee. So I guess I'll toss it back to you with like knowing that there's a lot of structural deficit in that knee, and you've been, I don't know, what did you say your best squat was? Like 780 something?
Nah, competition 750.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, don't.
My bad. 750. Okay. So like going from that, and like I've known you since before you squatted that.
Yeah.
And I haven't known you to take any time off of training between then and now. So like what has that looked like for you to continue to train through that and to be able to continue to have progress in the areas that you need to stay as functional as you need to be?
Yeah. So I think, if we're following along at home, and I realize that we're a podcast that people take notes on, which is like kind of cool.
Insane.
And you know what? Fucking right. It's like, I'm glad we're that. Like, so if you're listening, so first thing we talked about was like, all right, triage and troubleshoot. Let's do some damage control. First 24 hours, the decision we make between bucketing, subclinical versus clinical, right? And then we go a level deeper than that. And then our notes, we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the structure? What's the function? You listed off ACL, MCL, PCL, ALL, medial lateral meniscus, patella tendon, quad tendon, et cetera. But then you look at like hamstring and you look at gastroc and you look at quad and you're like, all right, we got something to play with. Iliotibial band could also be thrown into the mix there a little bit. So, okay, we understand structure function. Okay, so we're kind of like a few layers deep in inception already. My thing now is to introduce passive versus active range of motion, right? Passive versus active range of motion to me is going to be a pretty good determinant of where I'm at. So if I'm getting pain, if I'm getting apprehension, if I'm getting discomfort actively, which is like usually the case, very rarely do I have pain passively, but not actively, meaning this. So with my knee specifically, if I'm like, if I'm flexing my knee, so this is going to bifurcate yet again. So if you're taking notes, we're going passive versus active. And then if we're going active, we're splitting that into two groups and going loaded versus unloaded, right? Because if I can sit there and unload my knee flex, which is like usually better than load knee flex. So meaning like I just stand there, I put my hand on a wall, I take my left foot off the ground and I try and like flex my hamstring as much as I can. And then, flexing my knee, extend my knee, flex my quad. So that's a data point, right? So for me, if I can get passive range of motion through a half decent range, I know I'm in the money, right? Like if I can get passive range of motion, and we haven't reached a critical mass of structural damage yet. That's where I kind of have that like, yes, we're still out there taking shots, right? So that's a big one.